A mortar shell exploded just 30 meters from the eastern wall. Lieutenant Ryan Garrett felt the shockwave slam through his boots. Dust and debris rained down on the temporary command post as he pressed himself against the sandbag barrier. His radio crackled with desperate messages. Enemy contact at the south wall. Many attackers breaking through the fence. Ammunition low on the north side. Medic, we need a medic at checkpoint 3. Ryan rubbed the grit from his eyes and spoke into his handset. All positions, keep your fire disciplined. Save your bullets. Air support is on its way, ETA 20 minutes. The lie tasted like bitter copper in his mouth. The closest gunships were actually over an hour away, stuck on the ground by the sandstorm that had swept across the valley before sunset. Forward Operating Base Sentinel had been a quiet assignment until 3 days ago. 72 Marines, a few Navy medics, and enough supplies for a month of routine patrols. Now they were surrounded, outnumbered 5 to 1, watching their defenses crumble, one section at a time. Sergeant Hayes stumbled into the command post, blood streaming from a cut above his eyebrow. Lieutenant, we have maybe 200 rounds left across all our positions. The ammunition storage took a direct hit in the first attack. Ryan's mind raced through his options, each one worse than the last. They could fall back to the central building, but that meant leaving wounded men scattered across the compound. They could try a breakout, but in the dark through enemy territory, with injured people, it would be a bloodbath. Tell the squad leaders to collect ammunition from the wounded. Anyone who can't fight gives up their magazines. Ryan hated giving that command. This is how units were destroyed, rationing bullets like precious water in a desert. The compound shook again, this time close. The sharp crack of AK-47 fire echoed from many directions, mixed with the deeper booms of rocket-propelled grenades. Through the smoke and dust, Ryan saw muzzle flashes drawing nearer to the wire fence. Corporal Bennett, barely 20 years old with a face that still looked like it belonged in a high school yearbook, clutched his M4 rifle with white knuckles. "Sir, are we going to make it?" Ryan met the young man's gaze. The honest answer was no, but a leader gives a different answer. "We hold until morning. Marines never give up ground." He checked his own rifle's clip. 15 rounds. He had 2 more clips in his vest. 45 bullets between him and whatever came next. The radio squawked again. This time it was Corporal Davis from the western bunker. Movement on the supply road. Civilian vehicle approaching the gate. Civilian. Ryan's blood ran cold. Out here, 3 kilometers from the nearest village, in the middle of a firefight. Do not engage. Confirm it's not a VB. A vehicle-borne improvised explosive device could blast through their gate and end this siege in one terrible explosion. Negative on VBIED profile, sir. It's an old pickup truck. Single occupant. Driver is getting out now. Ryan grabbed his rifle and moved toward the west wall, staying low. What he saw through the pre-dawn darkness made no sense. A figure in civilian clothes moved with purpose toward the gate, seemingly unaware of the bullets whistling overhead. "Cover them," Ryan yelled. 2 Marines quickly aimed their rifles to provide suppressing fire as the figure reached the gate. Hayes pulled it open just enough for the person to slip through, then slammed it shut again. That's when Ryan saw her clearly for the first time. She appeared to be around 30, slender and tough, with dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. She wore a canvas jacket that had seen better decades, torn at the shoulder and stained with old blood. But what she carried made every Marine nearby stop and stare. It was a rifle, not a modern assault weapon. Not even a hunting rifle from this century. It was a bolt-action weapon that looked like it belonged in a museum. The wooden stock was scratched and worn. The metal barrel showed spots of rust, and the leather strap was cracked with age. "Ma'am, you need to get to the bunker immediately," Ryan said, moving toward her. "This is an active combat zone." She looked at him with eyes that were surprisingly calm given the chaos around them. "I know exactly where I am, Lieutenant." Another mortar round exploded, this one hitting near the medical tent. The woman didn't flinch. She scanned the compound with the expert skill of someone reading the land, not fleeing from it. Hayes stepped forward, hand on his sidearm. "Lieutenant, we need to take her into custody. She could be a spy, a saboteur, I am neither, she said, her voice cutting through Hayes's suspicion. And you are about to be overrun in roughly 8 minutes if you don't change your defensive positions. Ryan felt anger ignite in his chest. They were dying, and this civilian was giving military advice. Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but my name is Elena Reeves, she interrupted, meeting his glare without backing down. And this rifle belonged to my grandfather, Staff Sergeant Thomas Reeves, 1st Marine Division, Okinawa, 1945. He was a scout sniper, 97 confirmed kills with this exact rifle. The name meant nothing to Ryan, but something in her manner made him pause. She held the rifle as if it were part of her body, with the easy skill of someone who had spent thousands of hours with a weapon. Bennett's voice crackled over the radio. Enemy movement on the South Ridge. They're setting up heavy weapons. Elena moved before Ryan could respond, striding toward the southern sandbag wall with the confidence of someone who owned the ground beneath her. She dropped smoothly into cover, worked the rifle's bolt with precise motion, and brought the weapon to her shoulder. What are you doing? Ryan demanded, scrambling after her. Buying you time. She peered through the rifle's simple sights, made a tiny adjustment, and exhaled slowly. Tell your men to get ready to move positions when I fire. You can't possibly. The rifle fired once. The sound was different from modern guns, sharper, more raw. Through the scope of his own rifle, Ryan saw a figure on the distant ridge stumble and fall. Not just any figure, the one crouching behind what looked like a mortar launcher. A silence rippled across the compound. Marines who had been firing in desperate bursts paused, trying to understand what they had just seen. The ridge was over 600 meters away, in poor light, with wind gusting across the valley. Elena worked the bolt, ejecting the empty shell. 620 meters, accounting for a 7-knot crosswind and temperature drop. Your men can move now, Lieutenant. They'll try to flank from the northwest gully in response. Ryan stared at her, then at the old rifle, then back at her face. Who are you really? She met his eyes, and for the first time, he saw something beyond her tactical focus. A deep pain that matched the violence around them. Someone who knows how this ends, and someone who has business with the people trying to kill you. 20 years earlier, a 12-year-old Elena stood in her grandfather's workshop, the same rifle cradled awkwardly in her small hands. The wood still smelled of gun oil and old battlefields, even though Thomas Reeves had spent nearly 40 years trying to erase the war from its grain. Easy now, Ellie, the old man had said, his weathered hands guiding hers to the proper grip. This rifle has history. Respect it, and it will respect you back. Thomas Reeves looked like any other grandfather in small-town Montana. Flannel shirts, a coffee-stained smile, hands more comfortable with fishing rods than weapons. But Elena had seen the photographs tucked in his desk drawer. A young Marine in the Pacific, his face hardened by terrible experiences. This exact rifle slung across his shoulders. Why did you keep it, Grandpa? She had asked that day, struggling to hold the weapon steady. If the war was so bad, why not just get rid of it? He had been quiet for a long moment, looking out the workshop window at the mountains beyond. Because, little one, some things we carry aren't meant to be forgotten. This rifle saved my life 32 times I can count. Probably more I can't. It took lives too, enemy soldiers who would have killed me or my comrades if I hadn't fired first. It's a heavy thing to carry, but forgetting would be even heavier. She learned to shoot that summer, first at cans, then paper targets, then longer distances across the valley. Thomas taught her about wind and height adjustments, breathing and trigger control, patience and respect for the weapon. By 14, she could hit targets at ranges that made her grandfather shake his head in wonder. You've got the gift, Ellie, he had said one afternoon, after she'd placed 5 shots into a space smaller than her palm at 400 yards. Better than I ever was. But listen to me, this isn't a game, this is about life and death, and the burden of choosing between them. She had promised him then that she would never use these skills for violence, that the rifle would remain in the family as a relic, nothing more. She kept that promise through high school, through college, through her decision to become a humanitarian worker overseas rather than follow her father into military intelligence. Her father, Major David Reeves, USMC intelligence, was the man who had inherited his father's sense of duty but none of his caution about the cost of war. He was the man who had died 3 months ago in the same region, killed not by the enemy, but by someone within his own unit, a traitor who had sold information for money and covered his tracks with a bullet. Elena had buried her father with full military honor. She had listened to the speeches about sacrifice and service, and then she had returned to her grandfather's workshop, where Thomas, now 93 and fading fast, had placed the rifle in her hands one final time. "Your daddy's killer is still out there," he had said, his voice weak but clear. "I know you, Ellie. You're going back. I promised you I'd never use it for revenge," she said. "But that's not why you're going back." His grip on her hand had been surprisingly strong. "You're going because Marines are dying right now because of that traitor, and you're the only one who can stop it. Your father died trying to expose whoever is feeding information to the enemy. You finish his work, not for revenge, but for the men still in the fight." The old man died 2 weeks later. The rifle passed down one final time, carrying with it the weight of 2 wars and the ghosts of 3 generations. The Marines were arguing. Ryan could hear their raised voices even over the scattered gunfire, coming from behind the eastern bunker. Accusations and counter-accusations flew faster than bullets. "She's a spy. Has to be. No civilian just walks into a firefight. Did you see that shot? 600 meters in this light. Could be an insurgent leading us into a trap." Ryan found Elena where he had left her, carefully cleaning the old rifle with a cloth that looked as ancient as the weapon itself. She worked with the precise movements of a ritual, ignoring the chaos around her. "You need to tell me why you're really here," Ryan said, crouching beside. "My men think you're either CIA or an enemy. I need to know which before someone makes a bad decision." Elena didn't look up from her task. 3 months ago, someone in a forward operating base like this one sent secret messages to enemy forces, leading to an ambush that killed 17 Marines and 1 intelligence officer, my father. Now she did meet his eyes. The investigation went nowhere. The traitor is still active, still feeding information, and based on the exact planning of this attack, they are likely stationed here in this compound. Ryan felt a chill run through him. "That's impossible. Every man here has been checked and cleared." "So was my father," she replied, "until someone put a bullet in his head and made it look like an enemy attack." She finished with the rifle, working the bolt to check the mechanism. "I've spent 3 months tracking communication patterns, supply routes, intelligence. They all lead here, to FOB Sentinel, to your unit. And you decided to just show up in the middle of a siege?" Ryan asked. "I decided to follow the pattern. These attacks aren't random, Lieutenant. They are planned using real-time information from inside your perimeter. Someone here is telling them exactly when you're weakest, exactly where to strike." She gestured toward the compound. "This attack should have started an hour ago during the sandstorm, when your visibility was 0. Instead, it began precisely when your rotating guards would be most tired, right after a shift change. Someone told them the perfect timing." Ryan wanted to argue, to defend his men, but her analysis was sound. The timing had been too perfect, the enemy too well informed about their defenses. Hayes approached, his face grim. "Lieutenant, we have movement in the northwest gully, exactly where she said they would be." Elena stood, rifle in hand. "They will test your defenses there, looking for weak spot. When they find none, they'll launch a 3-pronged assault from the south, east and northwest, all at once. Estimated time 4 minutes. She looked at Ryan. "I know this because that's what I would do with the intelligence they have. And I know they have that intelligence because someone here gave it to them." "Even if you're right," Ryan said slowly. "Even if there is a traitor, what makes you think you can find them in the middle of a firefight? Because whoever it is will make a mistake during the chaos. They'll have to communicate with their contacts, coordinate the final assault. People get careless when they think they're about to win." Her jaw tightened. "And I'm very good at watching for mistakes." Corporal Bennett jogged over, breathless. "Sir, request permission to redistribute ammunition based on Miss Reeves's tactical assessment. If she's right about the 3-pronged assault, we need to strengthen those positions immediately." Ryan looked at the young Marine, then at Elena, then at the compound full of men trusting him to keep them alive. Every instinct screamed at him not to trust a civilian who had appeared out of nowhere with a rusty rifle and a wild theory. But 37 Marines were dead or wounded. Ammunition was critical, and dawn was still 3 hours away. Sometimes leadership meant trusting your gut when all the facts said otherwise. "Do it," Ryan ordered. "Hayes, coordinate with squad leader. Move 2 fire teams to positions covering the south, east, and northwest approaches. Bennett, you're on ammunition distribution." He turned to Elena. "You're with me. If you're right, prove it. If you're wrong, you're going to the brig until I can figure out what the hell is really going on." She nodded, once serious and military despite her civilian clothes. "Fair enough, Lieutenant, but I need access to your communications equipment and personnel lists." "Absolutely not," Ryan exclaimed. "Then you need to accept that good men will die because you're too stubborn to trust the one person who might be able to stop it." She held his gaze. "Your call." The compound shook with another impact. This one from the east, then south, then north. 3 positions, just as she had predicted, coordinated to the second. Ryan made his decision. "Come with me." The command post was a scene of organized chaos, like any headquarters under attack. Radio chatter mixed with shouted coordinates. Paper maps spread across a plywood table were marked with positions and casualty counts. Corporal Matthews, the radio operator, looked up in surprise when Ryan entered with Elena. "Sir, we have confirmation on those 3 assault positions. They're bringing up heavy weapons. Looks like they're preparing for a major push." "Understood. Get me Captain Miller on the northern position." Ryan turned to Elena. "You have 2 minutes. What do you need?" She had already moved to the communications log, her eyes scanning entries with the sharp focus of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Everyone who sent outgoing messages in the last 24 hours. Any encrypted communications that didn't go through official channel. Personnel who've been off compound in the last week. Matthews looked at Ryan, who nodded. The corporal pulled up the digital logs, reluctance clear on his face. Elena's finger traced down the list, pausing sometimes to compare entries with the compound's duty roster spread out beside her. Her expression remained neutral, but Ryan saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her other hand never strayed far from the rifle propped against the table. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to an entry. "Encrypted transmission. 1700 hours yesterday. Sent during the sandstorm when conditions would make interception difficult. Sent from Console 3, but the login code belongs to someone who wasn't supposed to be in communications at that time." "Could be a clerical error," Matthews protested. "People swap shifts. Use available terminals. Check who was logged into Console 3 at that time," Elena instructed. Matthews typed quickly, then frowned. "Staff Sergeant Warren, but his code shows he logged in from Console 1, not 3, meaning someone used his login without permission." Elena turned to Ryan. "Where is Warren now?" Before Ryan could answer, the building shook violently. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging them into darkness, lit only by emergency lamps and the glow of computer screens. "Direct hit on the generator," someone shouted from outside. In the chaos that followed, Marines scrambled for flashlights. Emergency procedures were shouted across the compound. Elena moved to the window and scanned the perimeter. Her grandfather's rifle came up smoothly, and she worked the bolt with practiced ease. "What are you doing?" Ryan demanded. "Making sure the traitor doesn't take advantage of this," she replied. "If they're going to send a signal or try to cause damage from within, now's the perfect time." Her eye found the sight picture, tracking slowly across the compound. "There, southwest corner, near the fuel depot. Someone's moving away from their defensive position, against the flow of traffic." Ryan grabbed his binoculars and followed her line of sight. In the emergency lighting and muzzle flashes, he could barely make out a figure in Marine combat uniform, moving purposefully toward the perimeter fence. "That's Staff Sergeant Warren," Matthews said from behind them, his voice uncertain. "But why would he be heading toward the fence during an attack?" Elena's answer was cold and certain. "Because he's going to signal the final assault coordinate, probably using a laser designator or an infrared strobe that we can't see, but the enemy has equipment to detect." "You don't know that," Ryan said, but his hand was already on his radio. "All positions, this is actual. I need eyes on Staff Sergeant Warren. Current position, southwest perimeter. Do not engage, but do not let him leave the compound. The response came back crackling with confusion and overlapping questions, but the main point was clear. Warren was too far away, too close to the fence, and in the darkness and chaos, no one could stop him in time. I can take the shot, Elena said quietly. Non-lethal. Wound him enough to stop him, keep him alive for questioning. Ryan's mind raced through the consequences. She was a civilian. Warren was a Marine with 12 years of service. If she was wrong, if this was all a terrible mistake or misunderstanding, he would have authorized shooting one of his own men based on the word of a stranger with a rusty rifle. Through his binoculars, he saw Warren reach the fence, saw him pull something from his vest. A small handheld device with the clear shape of a laser designator. Take the shot, Ryan said. Elena adjusted her position, bracing the rifle against the window frame. Her breathing slowed, becoming even and steady. Through the scope, she could see Warren raising the designator toward the enemy position on the ridge, about to mark the most vulnerable targets in the compound for what would likely be a devastating mortar or artillery strike. 640 meters. Crosswind still gusting from the west. Target moving slowly, focused on his equipment rather than his surroundings. She had maybe 2 seconds before he completed the transmission. The rifle cracked once, spitting flame into the darkness. The old weapon kicked against her shoulder like a living thing, familiar and fierce. Through his binoculars, Ryan watched Warren spin and fall, the laser designator tumbling from his hands. The man clutched his shoulder, writhing on the ground, but alive. Every Marine in the compound seemed to freeze simultaneously, caught between the external attack and this impossible internal event. In the sudden quiet, the only sound was Elena working the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, keeping her rifle aimed at Warren's position, until 2 Marines rushed forward to secure him. Hayes's voice came over the radio, shaken but professional. Target secured. He's wounded but stable. Sir, he was definitely trying to signal the enemy. We recovered the designator. Ryan slowly lowered his binoculars and turned to Elena. She was already clearing the rifle, her movements automatic, her face illuminated by emergency lighting, and something that might have been sorrow or grim satisfaction. My grandfather always said the hardest shots weren't the longest ones, she said quietly. They were the ones where you had to shoot someone who should have been on your side. Outside, the enemy attack faltered, confused by the lack of the signal they had been expecting. In the space of one bullet from a 70-year-old rifle, the entire tactical situation had shifted, but Ryan knew the fight was far from over. With Warren secured and being treated by a medic under armed guard, Ryan called an emergency meeting of his squad leaders. Elena stood to the side, reloading the rifle with ammunition that looked as old as the weapon itself. The brass cartridges she pulled from her jacket pocket were tarnished but well kept, each one representing a piece of history about to be used again. Here's what we know, Ryan told the 5 Marines gathered in the command post. Staff Sergeant Warren was trying to provide targeting information to enemy forces. Without that data, their planned attack loses its precision. They're going to be confused, angry, and likely to make mistakes. We need to use that to our advantage. Sergeant Hayes, his head wound now bandaged, shook his head in disbelief. Warren was in my training class. We deployed together twice. I don't understand how. We'll figure out the how and why later. Ryan interrupted. Right now, we need to change from just defending to making them pay for every meter they try to take. He looked at Elena. You said you studied your grandfather's tactics. What would he do? She moved to the map spread across the table, her finger tracing the land features around the compound. Okinawa was about understanding that being outnumbered doesn't matter if you control the key points and force the enemy to fight on your terms. You have high ground here, here and here. She marked 3 positions. The enemy has been attacking from the valleys, because Warren told them your weakest positions, but he also had to tell them to avoid certain areas, which means those areas are your strongest defensive terrain. The northern ridge, Bennett suddenly exclaimed, understanding dawning. We abandoned that observation post 2 days ago because Warren said it was too exposed, but if they've been avoiding it, then it's actually the best place for an ambush. Elena nodded. Exactly. Get a fire team up there with your remaining heavy weapon. When they try to regroup after their assault fails, catch them in the open. Ryan studied the map, then studied her. She understood terrain like a Marine officer. not a civilian humanitarian worker. Where did you really learn this? My father spent 15 years in intelligence. He'd come home from deployments and drill me on battle scenarios like some fathers play catch. Said it was important I understood the world he lived in. Her voice carried a sadness that spoke of old arguments and regrets. I thought it was too much. Turns out he was preparing me for this. Hayes grunted. All due respect, ma'am, but knowing theory is different from fighting under fire. Then test me, Elena said simply. Just give me a position, and I'll prove I can do more than shoot. Ryan made a decision that he knew would either save them or lead to his court-martial. Hayes, take Miss Reeves and Corporal Bennett to the northern ridge. Set up overlapping fields of fire. When the enemy realizes Warren hasn't checked in and tries to adjust their attack, I want you in position to tear through their formations. Sir, Hayes protests, taking orders from a civilian. You're not taking orders from her, Ryan countered, his voice hardening. You're accepting tactical advice from someone who has proven herself more trustworthy than one of our own. Warren almost killed us all. She stopped him. I'm willing to trust her, until she gives me reason not to. Are we clear, Sergeant? Hayes's jaw worked, but he nodded. Yes, sir. Clear. The team moved out into the darkness. Elena followed Hayes with the old rifle slung across her back. The enemy fire had quieted, confused by the lack of the signal they had been promised. It was a temporary break, and everyone knew it. The northern ridge was a difficult climb in full combat gear. Elena, carrying only the rifle, a bandolier of old ammunition, and a canteen, still felt her lungs burning by the time they reached the abandoned observation post. The spot overlooked a narrow valley that funneled toward the compound's northern gate, perfect for defense, which was exactly why Warren would have marked it as too dangerous to use. Bennett set up the M240 machine gun on its tripod while Hayes scanned the approaches with night vision equipment. Elena checked her rifle, counting her remaining ammunition, 37 rounds. Her grandfather had survived entire battles with less. Movement, Hayes whispered. Valley floor. Approximately 40 hostiles regrouping. They looked confused. Through the rifle sight, Elena could see them. Figures in mixed military and civilian clothing clustering around what looked like a commander trying to reorganize his forces after their failed assault. They thought they were safely out of range, far enough from the compound's main defenses. Range? She asked quietly. 720 meters, Bennett replied, checking his equipment. Winds picking up from the west, gusting to 12 knots. Elena did the calculations in her head, adjusting for the unfamiliar wind patterns of this desert, compared to the Montana valleys where she had learned to shoot. The rifle in her hands had been designed for these distances, crafted in an era when skilled marksmen regularly hit targets at ranges that would make modern soldiers shake their heads. When I fire, they're going to scatter, she told Hayes. Give them 3 seconds, then light them up with the machine gun. They'll run for cover in the rocks on the eastern side of the valley. That's where you'll do the most damage. How do you know they'll run east? Bennett asked. Because west has steeper terrain, south puts them closer to the compound's guns, and north takes them away from their support positions. East is the only logical choice. She settled into position, the old rifle stock finding her shoulder like it had been carved for her. The psychology of retreat is predictable once you understand fear. She breathed out slowly, found her natural pause, and pressed the trigger. The rifle boomed in the darkness. 700 meters away, the enemy commander dropped, and chaos erupted. The enemy forces scattered exactly as predicted, streaming toward the eastern rocks. Now, Elena said. Hayes didn't hesitate. The M240 opened up, its unique sound echoing across the valley. Tracer rounds arced through the darkness like angry fireflies, finding targets caught in the open. The ambush was devastating, precise, and exactly what the Marines needed to change the battle's flow. Elena worked the bolt, found another target, a machine gunner trying to set up a supporting position. Another shot, another enemy fighter removed from the battle. She had promised her grandfather she would never use these skills for revenge. This wasn't revenge. This was survival, protection, the original purpose for which the rifle had been made. By the time the enemy withdrew, dragging their wounded with them, the northern valley was littered with abandoned equipment and empty shell casings. The Marines on the ridge were silent, staring at Elena with a mix of awe and uncertainty. Ma'am, Bennett finally said, what exactly did you do before you came here? Elena slung the rifle and stood, her hand steady despite the adrenaline. I built schools in refugee camps, vaccinated children, delivered food to people who had lost everything to wars they didn't start. She met his eye. My father died trying to stop people like Warren from prolonging those wars. This rifle is just a tool. I'd rather never touch it again. But if using it means other fathers get to go home to their children, then I'll carry it as long as necessary. Hayes's radio cracked. Ryan's voice came through, strained but alive. Northern position. Be advised, enemy forces are retreating across all fronts. Whatever you did up there, it broke their assault. Get back to compound as soon as possible. We need to deal with our internal situation before they regroup. As they climbed down from the ridge, Elena thought about her grandfather, about the weight of a rifle carried across decades. She thought about her father, who died trying to expose the corruption in his own ranks, about the strange inheritance of violence, passed down like a family treasure, and the terrible need to know when to use it. The sun was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. They had survived the night, but the hardest fighting, Elena knew, was still ahead. Dawn broke over FOB Sentinel like an accusation, its harsh light revealing the damage of the night's battle. 14 Marines wounded, 3 critically, ammunition almost gone, infrastructure damaged. Yet, against all odds, they were alive. In the makeshift detention area, actually a supply room with armed guards outside, Staff Sergeant Thomas Warren sat handcuffed to a chair, his shoulder wound treated and bandaged. His face was pale but defiant when Ryan entered with Elena behind him. "You don't understand," Warren said immediately. "This isn't what it looks like." Ryan pulled up a chair, his exhaustion etched in the deep lines around his eyes. "Then explain it to me, Tom. Explain why one of my most experienced non-commissioned officers was about to laser designate targets for the people trying to kill us." Warren's gaze flickered to Elena, and something like recognition crossed his face. "You're Reeves's daughter." "David, I am," Elena said quietly, moving into his line of sight. "And you're the man who killed him." "No." Warren shook his head violently. "I didn't pull that trigger. That was..." He stopped himself, but the damage was done. Ryan leaned forward. "Who, Tom? Who pulled the trigger if not you?" Silence stretched between them, broken only by distant shouts of Marines reinforcing positions and treating the wounded. Finally Warren spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Captain Miller." The name hit Ryan like a physical blow. Captain James Miller, the compound's executive officer, second in command, a Marine with 18 years of service and 2 Bronze Stars, the man Ryan had trusted with his life a dozen times over the past 6 months. "That's impossible," Ryan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Elena asked, her tone cold. "Where is Captain Miller right now?" Ryan keyed his radio. "All positions. I need location confirmation on Captain Miller." The responses came back confused, overlapping. No one had seen the captain since the generator was hit. His last known position was the eastern bunker, but that was over an hour ago. "He left," Warren said. "During the chaos, during the attack, he had an escape plan with the enemy forces. That's why the assault was so precise. He was coordinating everything from inside, feeding them real-time updates. I was just his communications relay." "Why?" Elena asked, though she already knew. It was always the same answer. "Money? Ideology? Both? Neither. Does it matter?" Warren's defiance crumbled. "They have my daughter. My ex-wife took her to Europe 2 years ago. Got mixed up with the wrong people. Miller said he could get her out, get her safe, if I helped him. Just some intelligence reports, he said. Nothing critical." Then it escalated. "And by the time I realized what I was part of, they had enough evidence to bury me, and they still had my daughter." Ryan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the concrete floor. How long have you been harming this unit?" 8 months. Since before you even took command." Warren looked up at Ryan with red-rimmed eyes. "I tried to stop, God help me. I tried. But Miller, he's smart, careful, always had leverage." He looked at Elena. "Your father, he figured it out, found the pattern in the intelligence reports, traced it back to this compound. Miller found out he was investigating, and arranged the ambush, made it look like enemy action, but it was Miller who gave the order." Elena's hand tightened on her rifle. Ryan saw the muscles in her jaw clench, saw the battle between revenge and justice playing out behind her eyes. "Where did Miller go?" Ryan demanded. "What's his escape plan?" "The abandoned village, 3 clicks northwest."
There's a tunnel system the locals used during the previous war. The enemy forces were supposed to control the compound by now. Kill everyone as hostile fighters during the siege. No witnesses, no investigation. Miller would slip away in the chaos, already reported as killed in action. Warren coughed, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. That's why I had to send the coordinates for their final assault. If they'd failed, if people survived to investigate, Miller would have killed my daughter and blamed me for everything. Ryan turned to Hayes, who had been standing guard at the door. Get me Lieutenant Castellano and Corporal Bennett, full combat load. We're going after Miller. Sir, Hayes said carefully, we're barely holding the compound. If you take men for a pursuit, if Miller escapes, every Marine who dies in future attacks because of his intelligence is on us. Ryan's voice was steel. We end this now.
Elena checked her rifle, counting her remaining ammunition. 23 rounds. I'm coming with you. Negative. You've done enough. This is a Marine Corps matter now. It stopped being just a Marine Corps matter when my father died investigating this, she said, meeting his stare without flinching. Miller killed him. I'm going to make sure he faces justice. This isn't about revenge. I know, she interrupted. If it was about revenge, I'd have shot Warren in the head instead of the shoulder. I know the difference between justice and vengeance. Lieutenant, my grandfather spent 40 years teaching me. Ryan studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. You follow orders. You stay behind the Marines. And if I tell you to break off, you break off. Clear. 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 20 minutes later, a 5-person team moved out of the northern gate. Ryan, Hayes, Castellano, Bennett, and Elena. They traveled fast and low, using the land for cover, knowing that enemy forces might still be in the area. The abandoned village appeared through the morning haze like a ghost of better times. Mud brick buildings were collapsed or riddled with bullet holes, rusted vehicles half buried in drifting sand. Somewhere in this maze of decay, a traitor was trying to disappear. Ryan deployed his team in a standard sweep pattern, clearing buildings one by one. Elena moved with them, her old rifle ready, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. She had trained for humanitarian work, not city combat, but the basics her grandfather had taught her applied. Awareness, breath control, decisive action when needed. They found Miller in the third building they cleared, crouched in what had once been someone's kitchen, packing documents into a waterproof bag. His pistol was on the floor beside him, too far to reach before Ryan's team had him surrounded. Don't, Ryan said simply, his M4 rifle aimed at the captain's chest. Miller slowly raised his hands, turning to face them. He looked remarkably calm for a man caught red-handed in treason. Lieutenant Garrett, Miller said. I was wondering if you'd figure it out in time. Why, the respectful title felt bitter on Ryan's tongue. You're decorated, respected. You had a career, a future. Why throw it all away? Miller's laugh was harsh. Career, future. You think the Marine Corps takes care of its own? I have 32 confirmed kills, 3 combat tours, 2 Bronze Stars, and you know what I have to show for it. A pending divorce, PTSD that the VA refuses to treat, and a pension that won't cover my daughter's college. The people I was fighting were offering 10 times my annual salary for information that headquarters doesn't even consider important. So you got Marines killed for money. Elena said, stepping forward. Her rifle wasn't pointed at him, but it wouldn't take much to change that, including my father. Miller's eyes found hers. Your father was a problem. Too smart, too persistent. If he'd just filed his report through proper channels, it would have been buried in paperwork. But he kept digging, kept making noise. He was going to expose not just me, but an entire network of officers, making extra money by selling intelligence. Billions of dollars flowing to people who understand that patriotism doesn't pay the bills. He shook his head. I'm sorry about your father, truly. But he was unintended harm in a war that's bigger than one man's life. Elena's finger moved to the rifle's trigger. Ryan saw it and spoke quickly. Don't. He's not worth it. He killed my father, she said, her voice steady despite the rage Ryan could see building behind her control. I know, and he'll face justice for it. But if you shoot him now, you become exactly what he is. Someone who puts personal revenge above the law. Ryan stepped between Elena and Miller. Your grandfather carried that rifle through a war and never once fired it in anger outside of proper combat. Honor that. Honor him. For a long moment, Elena didn't move. The rifle remained steady, aimed past Ryan toward Miller. Then slowly, carefully, she lowered the weapon. "You're right," she said quietly. "He's not worth my grandfather's legacy." They zip-tied Miller's hands and began the march back to the compound. The man who had betrayed every principle he had sworn to uphold walked in silence, surrounded by Marines who had once called him sir, now looking at him like the traitor he was. Elena walked at the rear of the group, the old rifle slung across her back, and thought about justice, about revenge, about the difference between the two, and how thin that line could be. They were 100 meters from FOB Sentinel when the enemy attacked again. The first rocket-propelled grenade streaked past Hayes's head, close enough that the heat singed his uniform. It exploded against the rocks behind them, showering the team with stone fragments. Then the hillside erupted with muzzle flashes. "Contact!" Ryan shouted, dragging Miller down behind a low wall. "Ambush! Return fire!" Bennett and Castellano immediately opened fire, their rifles barking in controlled bursts toward the enemy positions. But the numbers were terrible. 5 Marines and a civilian against what looked like at least 30 enemy fighters in prepared positions. "They were waiting for us," Miller said with bitter satisfaction. "My backup plan. If I didn't make the escape window, they were supposed to hit anyone coming out of that village." "How thoughtful," Ryan snarled. He keyed his radio. "FOB Sentinel, this is actual. We are under heavy fire 100 meters northwest of the compound. Request immediate support. Be advised, we have the traitor in custody." The response crackled back. "Actual, be advised. Compound is also under attack. Enemy forces renewed assault when they saw you exit the wire. We cannot spare personnel for extraction." Ryan's blood ran cold. Miller had planned this perfectly. Draw out the leadership. Launch a simultaneous attack on the weakened compound. Whether the ambush team captured him or not was irrelevant. Either way, the compound would fall. "We need to break through," Hayes said, firing short bursts toward the enemy. "Get back to the compound before they overrun it. We'll be cut down in the open," Castellano countered. "We need cover." Supporting fire. Elena was already moving. She scrambled up onto the broken wall, the old rifle coming to her shoulder with practiced smoothness. "I'll suppress. You move on my signal." "That's suicide," Ryan said. "You can't hold them alone." "I won't be holding. I'll be hurting them enough that they keep their heads down." She worked the bolt, chambering around. "My grandfather held a ridgeline against a Japanese platoon for 40 minutes with this exact rifle. I figure I can buy you 5. Before Ryan could argue, Elena fired. The shot cracked across the desert, and through his scope, Ryan saw an enemy fighter fall from a position on the hillside. She worked the bolt smoothly, found another target, fired again. Another enemy down. The enemy fire shifted toward her position, rounds cracking and winding off the rocks around her. She didn't flinch, didn't rush. Each shot was deliberate, precise. She was using up her remaining ammunition, but every bullet found a target. "Move," she shouted. Ryan grabbed Miller and Hayes and the others laid down covering fire. They made it 20 meters before enemy fire forced them down again, but now they had better cover closer to the compound. Behind them, Elena continued her deadly work. 16 rounds left. 15. Each shot bought seconds, bought meters, bought survival for the Marines trying to reach safety. The rifle clicked empty. She had known it was coming, had counted every round, but the finality of it still hit hard. No more ammunition. No more suppressive fire. Just her and a 70-year-old rifle against an enemy that now realized she was no longer a threat. Enemy fighters began advancing, emboldened by the silence from her position. Elena looked at the rifle in her hands, then at the compound in the distance where Marines were fighting and dying. She thought about her grandfather, about honor and sacrifice, and the weight of carrying weapons meant to protect. Then she fixed the bayonet, an ancient blade her grandfather had kept with the rifle, and prepared to make her last stand count. The first enemy to reach her position died with the bayonet through his chest, Elena using the rifle like a spear. The second caught the stock across his jaw, shattering bone. She moved like her grandfather must have moved in the Pacific, efficiently, desperately, knowing that survival meant being faster and more vicious than men who outnumbered her. But there were 2 men. A rifle butt caught her in the ribs, driving the air from her lungs. Hands grabbed her arms, pulling her down from the wall. She fought,
using every dirty trick she had learned in self-defense courses. But physical force and numbers overcame skill. Then the compound 50 caliber machine gun opened up, its heavy rounds tearing through the enemy position with devastating effect. Ryan had made it back and had turned the compound's weapons on her attackers. The enemy trying to capture Elena scattered, and in that moment of chaos, she broke free, grabbed the old rifle, and ran. She made it to the compound's gate with bullets kicking up dust around her heels. Hayes pulled her inside, and the gate slammed shut behind her. She collapsed against the sandbags, lungs burning, ribs screaming, but alive. Ryan was there helping her up. That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen. Learned it from my grandfather, she managed between gasps. Never leave your weapon behind. Never abandon your position until the mission's complete. Your mission was to survive. You did that. She looked down at the rifle in her hands. Its stock cracked from being used as a club, the bayonet still wet with blood, but fundamentally intact, still capable, still carrying the weight of 2 wars. No, she said quietly. My mission was to stop Miller and protect the Marines still fighting. That's not complete until everyone gets home. The battle for FOB Sentinel raged for another 3 hours, with Miller captured and his intelligence no longer reaching the enemy. The attack lost its focus. The enemy forces, realizing they weren't going to get the quick victory they had been promised, pulled back in stages, dragging their wounded with them. By noon the valley was quiet, except for the sound of helicopters in the distance. Medical evacuation aircraft were finally able to land, now that the siege had ended. Elena sat in the shadow of the command post, cleaning the rifle one more time. Her grandfather's rifle, her father's legacy, her own burden now, carried into a new war, and somehow miraculously brought back out. The bayonet blade had a small nick that would need filing. The stock would need repair, but it was basically sound, and the barrel, despite 70 years and 2 wars, was still straight and true. Some things she thought were built to last, built to be passed down, built to carry the weight of protecting what mattered, generation after generation. She just wished it didn't have to be this particular inheritance. The morning after the siege, FOB Sentinel looked like it had been hit by a natural disaster. Sandbags were torn open and scattered, buildings pockmarked with bullet impacts, the vehicle area littered with shrapnel-damaged cars. But the flag still flew over the command post, tattered and scorched, yet defiant. Elena found Lieutenant Ryan Garrett on the northern ridge where she had set up the ambush, with Hayes and Bennett. He was alone, staring out at the valley where so much violence had occurred, where so many Marines had bled to hold ground that would be abandoned within the year. They're flying out the wounded in an hour, Ryan said without turning. Captain Miller and Staff Sergeant Warren are going in restraints. With a military police escort, there'll be an investigation, courts-martial, the whole system grinding through its process. Good, Elena said, though the word felt empty. Justice was important, necessary, but it wouldn't bring her father back. It wouldn't erase the nightmares she knew were coming. The faces of the men she had killed in that desperate last stand at the wall. You could go with them, Ryan continued. Get back to civilization. Hot showers, food that doesn't come in MRE pouches. You've earned it. What about you? What happens to the Marines still here? We hold until our relief arrives. Another 3 weeks if logistics works out. Another month if it does. He finally turned to look at her, and she saw the exhaustion etched deep in his features. We'll be fine. You don't need to stay. But she heard the unspoken question underneath. Will you stay? Elena looked down at the rifle in her hand. She had cleaned it thoroughly, repaired what could be repaired, but it would never be the same. Combat aged weapons the same way it aged people. You could maintain them, care for them, but the scars remained. My grandfather never talked much about the war, she said. When I was young, I thought it was because the memories were too painful. Later I realized it wasn't about pain. It was about weight, the weight of carrying experiences that civilians couldn't understand, shouldn't have to understand. You understand now? Ryan asked. I do. She traced a finger along the rifle stock, feeling the grain of wood that had absorbed 70 years of stories. He also told me that the hardest part of combat wasn't the fight, it was coming home afterward, knowing that you'd seen and done things that changed you fundamentally, and trying to find a place in a world that wanted you unchanged. Ryan was quiet for a moment. You planning on staying then? processing it with people who understand. I'm staying because there's more work to do. Warren gave up information, but he wasn't the only leak. Miller was part of a network, remember, other officers in other compounds selling intelligence. My father's investigation documented at least 6 other suspects. She met Ryan's eye. Someone needs to finish what he started. That's not your job. Let the investigation. The investigation will take years. Tied up in military bureaucracy and politics. People will close ranks, destroy evidence. You know it. I know it. Her voice hard. My father died because he got close to the truth. I'm not going to let that be for nothing. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that I stay embedded with units like this one. Officially as a civilian liaison or humanitarian coordinator, I have the credentials, but really I'll be watching, looking for the patterns my father identified, finding the leaks before they can do more damage. That's dangerous. If Miller's network realizes what you're doing, they already know who I am. Warren recognized me, which means Miller knew I was David Reeves's daughter. Coming here, stopping their operation. That puts a target on my back whether I pursue this or not. She allowed herself a small, grim smile. At least this way I'm hunting them instead of waiting for them to come for me. Ryan studied her for a long moment. You're not talking about justice anymore. This is starting to sound like revenge. Maybe, she admitted. There's a thin line, isn't there? Between stopping bad people and punishing them. Between protecting others and avenging wrong. My grandfather walked that line his whole life. Never quite sure which side he was on, but always trying to stay on the right side of it. And you think you can do the same? Elena looked down at the valley, at the places where men had died on both sides. I think I have to try, because if I don't, if I just go home and try to forget, then every Marine who dies because of intelligence leaks, every family that loses someone because corruption persists, that becomes my responsibility. I couldn't stop my father's death, but maybe I can prevent others. They stood in silence, watching the helicopters approach in the distance. The sound of the rotors grew louder, bringing supplies, reinforcements, and in the formal process of investigation and accountability. Your grandfather's rifle, Ryan said. Are you going to keep carrying it? I don't know. She lifted the weapon, feeling its weight. Part of me wants to lock it away, let it finally rest after all these years. Another part knows that tools don't stop working until the job is done. What job is that? Protecting people who can't protect themselves. Exposing corruption before it kills. Being the person my father tried to be. The person my grandfather was. She paused. The person I hope I can become. Ryan pulled a small notebook from his pocket and scribbled something. This is my personal contact information. Not military channel. Just if you need someone who understands what you're doing. Someone who won't ask questions when you need to move fast or get information. He handed her the paper. Your father wasn't wrong to keep digging. Neither are you. Elena took the paper, tucking it carefully into her jacket pocket next to her last few rounds of ammunition. Thank you, Lieutenant. Ryan, if we're going to be working in the shadows of military bureaucracy, we might as well be on a first-name basis. Elena, she held out her hand, and they shook. Not a civilian and a soldier, but two people bound by a common purpose and shared trauma. The helicopters were landing now, kicking up dust that turned the morning gold. Marines rushed to assist with unloading, to load the wounded, to brief the arriving investigation team. The machinery of military justice began its slow, grinding work. Elena walked back toward the compound, the rifle slung across her shoulders. She had come here for answers and found. She had come for revenge and chosen justice instead. But she had also found something unexpected. Purpose. The same sense of mission that must have driven her grandfather through the Pacific. Driven her father through years of intelligence work. Some burdens were meant to be carried, passed down through generations. Some fights were worth continuing even when you weren't sure you could win. She just hoped she had the strength to carry this particular burden as far as it needed to go. 6 months later, at Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia, a memorial ceremony was held for Major David Reeves and the 17 Marines who had died in the ambush that took his life. The investigation had finally finished, confirming what Elena had discovered: a network of corrupt officers, selling intelligence, trading American lives for money. Captain James Miller was facing court-martial and life imprisonment. Staff Sergeant Warren had pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for testifying against the larger network. 8 other officers were under investigation. The corruption was being cut out slowly and painfully, but finally exposed to the light. Elena stood at the back of the ceremony wearing a simple black dress that felt strange after 6 months of tactical clothing and desert dust. She had spent that time embedded with 3 different forward operating bases, quietly watching, gathering avers, passing information to investigators through secure channels. The rifle was back home now, locked in her grandfather's old workshop. She decided it had earned its. There were other tools for the work she was doing now. Cameras, encrypted communications, the ability to move through military areas as a trusted civilian. The old weapon had served its purpose, bridging the gap between generations, proving that sometimes history could reach forward and change the present. Lieutenant, now Captain, Ryan Garrett approached her after the ceremony. You didn't have to stay back there. You're part of this story. I'm not looking for recognition. This memorial is for the people who died, not for the people who survived. She watched the family members receiving folded flags, saw the tears, and the stiff military bearing barely containing grief. Did they mention my father's investigation in the official record? They did. He's being given the Defense Superior Service Medal after his death for his work exposing the corruption. Ryan paused. They want to give you a civilian medal too, for your actions at FOB Sentinel. I'll decline. Medals draw attention, and attention makes the work harder. She turned to face him. How are your Marines, the ones who were at Sentinel, scattered to new assignments? Hayes made staff sergeant. Bennett is on embassy duty in Europe. Most are doing okay considering. His expression darkened slightly. A few are struggling with what Warren's betrayal means. It's hard to trust your comrades when one of them was selling you out. That's why this matters, Elena said quietly. Finding the others in the network, making sure it doesn't happen again. Trust is the foundation of military units. These people poison that foundation. Speaking of which, Ryan lowered his voice. There's a situation developing at Camp Leatherneck, Afghanistan. Intelligence patterns, similar to what your father documented, but the unit there is getting ready to deploy to an isolated valley. It could be another Sentinel situation. Elena's jaw tightened. You have details. He handed her a folder. Unofficial. Technically, I could be court-martialed for sharing this with a civilian. Then why are you? Because official channels take too long, and Marines are going to die if we wait for proper authorization. He met her eyes. Your father understood that sometimes you have to break rules to save lives. I think you understand it too. She took the folder, already scanning the contents, deployment schedules, personnel files, intelligence summaries. The pattern was there if you knew how to look. Information leaking at precise intervals. Attacks timed with suspicious accuracy. An officer with unexplained wealth. I'll need to get embedded with this unit before they deploy, she said, her mind already working through the logistics. Already arranged. You're going in as a State Department liaison, attached to their humanitarian assistance program. Ryan allowed himself a small smile. Turns out the military likes having civilians around when they want plausible deniability. Thank you, Ryan. Don't thank me. Just find the leak before more Marines end up on Memorial Wall. He glanced back at the ceremony where a chaplain was offering closing prayers. Your father would be proud of what you're doing. Your grandfather too. Elena thought about that workshop in Montana, about the rifle hanging on the wall, about the weight of inheritance, and the choice to carry forward something difficult because it was necessary. I hope so, she said. I really hope so. 3 weeks later, Elena was in Afghanistan, watching a new compound, meeting new Marines, looking for signs of new betrayals. The rifle stayed home, but its lessons traveled with her. Patience, precision, the understanding that sometimes one well-placed action could change everything. In the command post at FOB Sentinel, a photograph hung on the wall. It showed Lieutenant Garrett and his Marines, battered and exhausted, but alive, standing with a woman holding an old rifle. No names were attached to the photo. No official caption, just a moment caption. A story that would be told in whispers among Marines who served there. That's the woman who walked in during the siege. New arrivals would be told. She had a rifle from World War II and took shots that shouldn't have been possible. Saved the whole compound, they'd say. Exposed a traitor in the ranks. Is the story true? The new Marines would ask. And the veterans would look at the photo, remembering the sound of that old rifle cracking in the darkness, and say and if you're ever in a situation where a civilian walks in with an impossible weapon during an impossible fight, you might want to listen to what they have to say. The legend of the ghost sniper had lived on through Thomas Reeves, passing into Marine Corps folklore. Now that legend had a new chapter, a new carrier, a granddaughter who had taken up the burden not out of desire for glory, but out of necessity. Some stories don't end, they just find new people to tell them, new battles to fight, new reasons to remember that courage and sacrifice aren't bound by time or generation. They're choices made again and again by people who understand that the hardest battles aren't always the ones fought with bullets. Sometimes they're the battles fought with truth, with persistence, with the refusal to let corruption and betrayal go unchallenged. Elena's work was far from over. There were more leaks to find, more units to protect, more families who deserved to see their Marines come home. The rifle might be retired, but the mission continued. In Montana, in a quiet workshop, an old rifle rested on its rack, cleaned, maintained, ready if ever needed again. A tool that had served 3 generations, spanning 8 decades, from the beaches of Okinawa to the deserts of the Middle East. And in Afghanistan, a woman with her grandfather's eyes scanned a compound for signs of betrayal, carrying forward a legacy that refused to quit, refused to compromise, refused to let the bad people win. The legend lived on, not in the rifle, but in the people willing to carry what needed carrying, willing to fight what needed fighting, willing to be what others needed them to be. That was the true inheritance, not a weapon but a choice, and Elena had made